Okay, and so welcome back for those of you who are back with us from last year. This is our third one now that we finished living systems and we've done matter, and so now we're into the earth systems. And at the end of earth systems, we will have one more to go, which is in November, and that will be for looking at uh, energy, and then we'll be done. So by the end of November, you will have your core organizing ideas already covered, and that will give you a better part of the year to really kind of look through and unpack things as you're going. Oh, Janet, you said it's been raining at your place all day. My gosh, where are you? It hasn't been raining at mine, although it was this morning. So totally get
I'm in
it.
Sylvan Lake.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm in Camrose, and yeah, no, we had a little bit of rain this morning, but it's been blue sky for the rest of the day. So it's better than the S word, so
Yes,
we'll
yes.
take it for sure. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Chris Sarsky, for those of you who are new to us. And I am one of the curriculum consultants for CARC, as well as the North for NRLC. And I have the pleasure of working with the best science partner there is. And I'm going to get Ted to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm a consultant with the ERLC, the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortia, and I'm coming to you today from not raining Sherwood Park.
No, it's been quite nice, actually. So as we mentioned, we are diving into Earth systems, and depending on where you started with your planning this year, I know some of you are following sort of the order that we were in, which was living systems, then matter. Others are doing it in different order, and that's fine. Whatever's working for you. You will find that Earth systems has a lot of overlap from some of the other things that we've done in the past, so it's kind of a bit of a review time as well. But there's lots in here to unpack, so we really kind of want to get going so that we can share with you all of the ideas and the resources that we have. Just a reminder too that what we're sharing with you are possible ideas that you could do to help frame your unit. We're not suggesting that you're going to just take slide one and work your way through the slide deck and saying that that's your unit. You are welcome to use any and all of the materials that are in here, or what works for the way you envision your unit to be unpacked based on where you live and the activities that you're thinking of. We do have activities in here. We do have suggested assessments in here. And so those are the pieces that we really want you to be aware of, that they're there to use in whatever capacity works for you. Okay, so let's start off with our land acknowledgement. And for those who are just joining us for the first time, with the land acknowledgement, we always try to build in something that links to the organizing idea that we're about to unpack with you. And because we're talking very much about land, we're talking very much about change, we're talking about envisioning and looking at how the land speaks to us and how we treat the land in itself is part of Earth systems. We have chosen the Honorable Harvest as one of the videos to show you. And we are going to watch it. It's not long, but it ties in very, very well. So I'm going to start with that, and I'll go back and I will read the acknowledgement.
Sorry, I had to listen to that.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants, who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? The protocols for the honorable harvest are not really written down, but if they were, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We're taught never to take the first plant that you see, and that means you'll never take the last. This is a prescription with inherent conservation value. And then if we encounter another plant, we ask permission. I've always been taught to address that plant, to introduce myself and tell it what it is that I have come for. If you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable for it. I know there are places where if you talk to a plant, they think you are crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. You can listen in different ways, pragmatically, intuitively. Look around, see whether those plants have enough to share. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us. And taking without permission is also known as stealing. And the Honorable Harvest counsels that we also take in such a way that does the least harm and in a way that benefits the growth of the plant. Use everything that you take. It's disrespectful of the life that's given to waste it. The next tenet of the Honorable Harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with us, so we have to model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing, we know, is a culture of resilience. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but it can also be a material gift. Weeding, caretaking, spreading seeds, helping those plants to flourish. We give songs, we give ceremony, we give our respect, we give fertilizer. Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. On the water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
I'm going to bring that down a little bit. There we go. All right. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. So today, what we'd like to do, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this won't be anything to you, but for those who've been with us for a while, you know that we've kind of changed the approach every time we bring up a new slide deck. And we're going to do much the same this time. We're actually going to start with sort of that proper planning, which we all do as teachers, and that is with the end in mind. So we want to look at what is it that we need to actually achieve with the students, and how are we going to get them there. So this is kind of how we will unpack it, starting with the end part. We're going to talk a little bit about assessment planning, and then we'll look at what are some activities that might help support that process in getting them towards the end in mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ted to start us off, and then we will move forward from there.
Thanks, Chris. This is just a really quick review, just to remind ourselves that we're talking about aspiring curriculum, because as we're working with the learning ideas more and more, or organizing ideas more and more, and the more we develop activities and present and work with them, the more we're finding that spiraling curriculum comes more into play, not only because things are spiraling in and out of different organizing ideas, from living systems to matter to earth systems, that you'll see some of the same things pop up. But some of those same ideas and concepts also appear in other curricula, such as math. They show up in science, such as we'll see later today, the concept of time. So that whole notion of a spiraling curriculum is really important, because once again, it's very different from the old science programs we used to work with the topics, and we did our topic and that was it, and we moved on to the next topic in our course and that was it. and the next grade that same thing. So I just want to review that whole notion of how things are spiraling out of the curriculum, and ideas or concepts, excuse me, and skills develop deeper and deeper as we move through, not only through the organizing ideas and the curricula for your specific grade, but also through the grades in science. I'll show you what I mean if we take a look at the next slide. This is an example of how the conceptual understanding grows. And we're talking about, we're looking at Earth systems and how the concepts are related and grow here. This may be a little bit small for you to read, but I'll just quickly give a brief review. I won't go through all of them, but just to give you a sense of what it is. In kindergarten, when we're developing the whole concept really of environment at the kindergarten level, and that the environment has objects in it, and some of them are natural and some of them are man-made, and that we explore our environment through our senses. Now, senses shows up there, but it's really unpacked in kindergarten matter organizing idea. So once again, we can see how things start spiraling. When we get to grade 1, which is the grade we're on now, we layer onto that, and that when it comes to the environment, we have a responsibility to care for it. That's an added thing. As well, we expand the whole notion of change, and that change can be sudden or seasonal or slow. And then that's when we get into the slow change of seasons and the seasonal changes. And that changes has an effect on not only animals, but humans as well. Going into grade 2, we're going to layer onto that as well. And we're going to take a look at, we took at the natural world that was introduced in kindergarten. We expand on the landforms and water bodies from the natural world in grade 2. We take a look at what are landforms, what are water bodies, and so on. And then we also take a look how continue that concept of change and how Earth experiences change in terms of the day and the year, and that's caused by the relationship with the sun. And finally, when we get to grade 3, we got on even more. If you could see the lines going down to landforms and water bodies at the bottom right, we know that those are part of the Earth's surface, and the Earth's surface is explored in grade 3. And then there are examples of the different landforms and water bodies in terms of I'm just trying to read those small little things here. Oh yeah, in terms of layers of the Earth's surface. So we start talking about examples of the Earth's surface and its layers. We take a look at dinosaurs and so on, and the fossils and the layers. We also take a look at how the environment can change and what causes some of those changes. And there should be a link in there. You'll see it's linked up to change as well. On the top part, there's a line that goes up to the top. Well, the environment changes as well due to erosion. And we don't get into erosion. We talk about water, wind, and so on. At the end of the day, an example of how this curriculum grows in a spiraling nature with the ideas and understandings within them. With that, what I've done here is created a concept map more specifically to grade 1, just to give you an idea, an overview quickly of what's in grade 1 Earth systems. And if you begin at the very top where there's a yellow box there that says environment, it's a bit of a review with grade 1 in the sense that we go to the left, environment are explored using our senses. And we can understand our environment more by using our senses. And we explored the notion of change a little bit further in grade 1, that change can either be fast or slow. Fast change includes things like storms and fires and landslides. Slow change includes things like the seasons, and the seasons is the focus of that type of a slow change in this organizing idea. And change, of course, does affect the behavior, so we're getting into the blue boxes, of animals and humans. Now, there's one, I think it's the last cusp line that talks about, and Chris, I'm going to have you point out to the notion that that humans have a responsibility to care for the environment. It's on the very far left in the pink box. And I have that there because when you look at the learning outcome basically states that students identify interactions within the environment. So we're talking about humans caring for the environment. That's half of the interaction, because interaction means one thing affects the other. So if humans have the responsibility of caring for the environment, that loops around, and that loop is kind of missing but it's in grade 1 living systems. Well, the environment provides us with our basic needs for survival. And so humans have the responsibility of caring for the environment. So that's an example of an interaction. So that's where the caring, at least from my perspective, the idea of caring comes in. It's directly connected to that whole notion of interaction in the environment. The environment provides for us. We, in that interaction, care for the environment. And that's what's taken in grade 1. And again, you've seen this before, but this is a focus on Earth systems. And again, to get a broader perspective, how the different concepts progress through the grades. You can't really read it. It's not a very clear graphic I have on there. We can go to that link to get all those things there. But I just wanted to point out to you that when you go through it, yeah, there's the link that goes through all of them. And when you do that, you can see side by side how the progressions progress, and you can see what happens in the grade before, so you know what kids should be coming in with, and then have an idea of what are some of the important things that students will need to carry on to the next grade science unit. So that's there for you.
That's the chat box for everybody.
And we can go on to the next slide, Chris. So those concepts spiral in and out of the curriculum, and so do the skills and procedures. They spiral in and out of between different organizing ideas within a grade science unit and between the different grades. And just a reminder that it's those skills procedures are what students do to demonstrate what they know and understand. So that students know how to, for example, compare and contrast or discuss or describe, that they're good at that is important, that we need to give them practice in using those skills, because that's really what they're doing to demonstrate what they know. So if we want to get a clear picture of their understanding, we have to be certain that they understand and are proficient in those skills. You've seen this graphic before if you've been with us before, but I want to point out a couple new things, and that's the next slide. This graphic and the other one that are with it show the key verbs that are part of not only the grade, but are part of the sequence of grades or the progression of grades. We take a look specifically at the learner outcome grades. You could see them in this graphic listed off. In grade 1, the verbs that appear in the learning outcome is analyze, describe, examine, follow instructions, investigate, and relate. So those are some of the key skills to focus on because they're directly in the learning outcome. But if we go to the next slide, we'll see that there are a variety of skills that are introduced and used in the skills and procedures statements, that right-hand column. What this graphic does is it takes all the skills and procedure statements from K to grade 3, and we've pulled every doing or every verb out of it to get a frequency. And what we've found was that these are the most common verbs or skills from grades K to 3. And you can see them. The dark colored means that those verbs are directly in the skills and procedure statement. So if we go to grade 1, we are going to see the word compare. For example, it's got a dark color. It's going to be directly in one or more skills and procedure statement. Same with predict and relate and represent. They will show up directly. The lighter colored ones means that they don't show up directly in the skills and procedures statement, but we can assume that we must still keep progressing those forward. They are introduced in kindergarten and they're kind of become sub-skills of some other large skills. So for example, in grade 1, you'll find that there isn't anything in any of the skills and procedure statement that says ask questions, but we do know the first step in an investigation, and if you take a look down further, investigate is a part of grade 1 skill. Asking questions is the first step in an investigation. So they're kind of sub-skills there. We'll take a little closer look at that later on. So knowing that, then we see then in this particular example, skills and procedures says, this statement says from the second cusp line to describe various environments. Now, if we just have students just describe, we will, continue to have them to do that. They will perhaps become very good at describing. But then there are other skills that we want to make sure that students get practice in as well. Because if describe just shows up once in a complete organizing idea, they're never going to chance to get a lot of practice. We can also give practice by just including those other skills in. For example, I'm going to go to the very bottom. Not only can we get kids to describe the various environments, but we can get them to compare them. And you see the word compare shows up in grade 1. So let's give them more than one exposure to comparing. Let's give them a chance to compare various environments or compare along the way. Now you notice I included the word analyze in there. And the reason for that is it doesn't show up in any of the skills and procedure statements in grade 1. You'll see analyze is not on that list on the right-hand side, yet it appears in the learner outcome, which means it should be a skill that should be included in this organizing idea, taking a look at it in some way. And I'll give some examples of how we can perhaps understand analyzing at a grade 1 level that can help kids be successful in analyzing their environments along the way. So these skills, again, you can choose any of these for assessments because at the end of the day, they're what students do to demonstrate what they know. So they need a lot of practice with them in a variety of contexts. And finally, we have those understandings. Just a quick review. The understanding is that part of the curriculum that connects those individual concepts. In other words, you put them together in a logical, meaningful order, and now we've got something greater than just the individual concepts. So I'll show you what I mean on the next slide. If we take a look at that first cost plan in grade 1, we introduced the concepts of seasonal change, or not just first cost plan, but through several of them, a seasonal change, sudden change, animal behavior. And that concept of change does spiral in from kindergarten. Kindergartens are already introduced to that. But seasonal change, sudden change, and animal behaviors are new ideas. The question becomes, how do we organize those in some meaningful and logical order? They're all connected in some way. And that's what we see in the understanding then in the next slide. In grade 1, they're connected in this way, that seasonal or sudden changes can affect the behavior of animals. And so that's what the understanding is. We spend time developing that knowledge piece. What is a season? What are behaviors? What are different animal behaviors? What's migration, for example? What's hibernation? Now, how do we put this all together in the understanding? We can move on, Chris. Yeah. Now, because we have a spiraling curriculum and we have skills that move from one organizing idea to the other, they transfer. The spiraling, the concepts appear in one organizing idea and another one. That means that these things transfer. We can see them and apply them in a variety of different contexts. For example, we take a look at these grade 1 concepts of change, sudden change, and slow change. I've provided 2 contexts here where we would ask students to identify those concepts and those pictures. We can provide totally different contexts and see if they can do them as well, because those ideas are transferable. They can see them through in a whole lot of different ways or different places. Not only are those concepts transferable, but the understandings themselves. When we combine those concepts together in an understanding, like in the next slide, we'll see that that's transferable as well. And you see I'm missing my picture there. It should be a picture of a person in a parka. But the understanding at this grade, one of the understandings in grade 1 is seasonal or sudden changes can affect the behavior of animals. And I had a picture of someone in a parka. And the question is, well, is that true in both situations, where even when someone's wearing an umbrella versus someone wearing a parka? Yes, we could explain how and why that happens. And so because understandings, concepts, skills, they're all transferable, and they all appear in different ways throughout the organizing ideas. We should just pause a moment again and take a look at that whole notion of how we move to transfer, so we can get kids to be successful in using those understandings, concepts, and skills. You've probably seen this several times before. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail. The only thing I'll do is I've added a couple arrows on here, and I just want to point this out to you. But very quickly, the phases of learning put forward by Hattie Fisher and Fry says that if we want to help students to transfer, we have to spend time at the surface level and make sure students really understand those concepts and those skills in a good way that we can move on. So we spend time introducing them, talking about it, in some cases being explicit, some cases not. And then we give them all kinds of iterations, all kinds of experiences to practice that skill, or to, if you can imagine taking the concepts and giving them different pictures to look at, say, can you see that concept here? Can you see that concept there? We're deepening their understanding of those concepts and skills, the more iterations and practice they get. You'll notice the understandings appears in that deep part, because now when we get into the deep learning, that's where we take those individual concepts and put them together in the understandings. So now when you get kids to work with the understandings, you're working at the deep level, and the more iterations and the more examples you get them to test those understandings, the more we're moving towards transfer. Deep and transfer are very similar, because when you're moving into deep, you're automatically choosing a new context, which is the different color bubble. So you're automatically transferring to a new situation. The only difference is the amount of independence and how different or unfamiliar that context is when you get to the transfer piece. So there's going to be lots of practice, lots of tryings. We'll give lots of activities along the way here to show how we can move from deep to surface to transfer. And the other arrow at the bottom is not only works with the individual, or just wanted to point out that we can move the concepts, the individual concepts, from a surface level to just a definition to a deeper level, so they can see it in different contexts, and they can provide examples and non-examples. That's already a fairly deep level of a concept, and then giving a very unfamiliar situation for the transfer. And I added those arrows into this graphic as well, because we're often moving back and forth as we do assessments and do our observations of students. We may have to zip back into the transfer, or more practice opportunities before we get into the transfer. Excuse me. So keeping that in mind, how do we plan for that transfer? Well, as Chris mentioned at the start, we have to begin with the end in mind. We've got to start with our summative assessment, how we're going to assess our kids at the end of the day, as suggested by Wiggins and McTighe, do some backwards planning. And that means starting with the assessment and then working backwards, say, well, for students to be successful in that assessment, what do they need to know and be able to do? So we're talking about the end in mind, and we're talking about working backwards. We're talking about beginning with the learning outcome and the understandings. If we're going to assess that learning outcome, what do students, when we create that assessment to assess that, we have to take a look at our assessments and say, what are kids needing to know and being able to do with that? And same with the understandings. They're the big things as well that we want to make sure we assess and get some information on. Those are the two big things. Those are the ends that we're really trying to reach here. And when we start assessing those, we're essentially providing students with a transfer situation, because we're probably going to give them a new context to test those understandings in. I'll give an example of what I mean by beginning backwards. If we just take a look at the learning outcome, it's a pretty it's really quite a big learning outcome for grade 1, because there's lots in there where they can look at students analyzing. We've got the concept environment, and we're taking a look at investigating. That's new to grade. It wasn't in kindergarten. And we're also talking about interactions and changes. So students are analyzing things, they're also investigating things, and they're also looking at the interactions. I think to get one big assessment, at least from my point of view, to do it all could be a really onerous and big thing. So what I just did provide one summative assessment to focus in on just students investigate. If you could zoom into that, Chris. I just took one part of that, a focus, because I think this is a fairly big thing to do at grade 1, that students investigate interactions with the environment. So investigate means to look at it closely. We'll break down the steps for grade 1, but developing that interaction with the environment. So here's a possibility, and I won't go through the whole assessment with you, but one thing you may want to do, or one assessment that may meet that, would be they look at the interaction between students in their school and the plants in the schoolyard. What kind of interaction is happening? Are kids stomping on things? Are they breaking things? Are they taking care of things? What kind of interaction is happening? And then we'd also want to know not only how the kids are interacting with the environment, with the plants, but what effects do the plants in the schoolyard have? Are there trees there? Are kids playing in it? Does it provide shade? All those things. Are there shrubs there that students stand behind on a windy day to stay warm? So what are the benefits what are the positive effects of the environment, and how are we treating that environment? So now we're getting to that interaction part. What are the benefits and how do we treat it? So the rest of the survey, or this assessment, would take a look at, well, how can we investigate it? And it takes the students through the 4 stages of an investigation, which we'll look at fairly soon here. That's to ask some questions, make some predictions, gather the information, and make some conclusions. So some fairly big things here that would have to be done in order to complete that kind of assessment on the whole. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about investigation, that's part of the scientific methods organizing idea. So really, at the end of the day, we're going to have to do some front-end learning with that scientific methods part to really apply it into this learning outcome, where they have to do an investigation at the learning outcome level. So I'm not going to go through the rest of that, but in order to do this, I just wanted to share this with you. In order to do an assessment like that, do an investigation as part of their assessment, and work with interaction, students need to know a lot. So let's go to the next slide, Chris. What do they need? What might they need to know to do this? Well, an interaction is part of a relationship, and maybe they need to know what a positive and negative relationship is. And perhaps maybe some responsibility. There's something in there where there's an action plan in there to do with the responsibility part, but it doesn't have to do that. But just do that front end part. Those things are what students need to know. They know what relationship is. They know what an interaction is, positive and negative effect. As well, what will they be able to do? They will need to complete an investigation, including analyzing and describing. We're going to include that in part of this investigation, perhaps. This would be one where I might, but teachers may not want to include analyzing. You'll find that you're going to be doing analyzing anyway, because when they look at things, they're going to be analyzing, and I'll show you that shortly. So they need to know and do a lot to get that assessment. Now, don't forget, that's at the very end. So we'll see how we can get there. So not only do we assess, and we're going to be looking at planning how we're going to do the learning outcome, we're also looking at those individual understandings. In this particular case, we have an understanding called seasonal or sudden changes can affect the behavior of animals. How might we assess that? If you take a look at the skills and procedure statement, there is a statement there that could be used in this assessment, and it states, if we go to it's right there, yeah, but students share personal experiences related to sudden changes in their environment. Well, students can't share personal experiences related to sudden changes in the environment if they don't know what sudden changes of the environment are. So what do they need to know to do that formative assessment? They need to know, of course, what those sudden changes are. So we're going to do, as part of that surface level, we're going to be teaching some of those things. So every time we're thinking of what kind of assessment we're going to have in place, that automatically says, here's what we need to know, here's what we need to teach the students before we get to that assessment, leading up to the assessment. They're going to help include the things we need to help identify the things we need in our unit plan and the activities we choose. We can go to the next slide then, Chris. So when we're talking about the surface, then for this particular organizing idea, there's a lot of skills that students will need to know. They're going to be introduced to, they're going to be doing some investigating, which includes sub-skills of asking questions, observing, describing, predicting, analyzing, making conclusions, perhaps even making concept maps and so on. Any of those skills that I think they're going to be doing, I want to make sure and teach at the front end of my unit to make sure they have those so that I can have them practice it through the unit. Same with concepts, change, time, relationships, interaction, perhaps cause effect even. We may want to, that's going to be introduced at the surface level as well. Once we know that, then we can start planning our activities and our instructional approach along the way here. So we're gonna give you a list of possible instructional activities that you might want to do at the surface level. Again, as Chris mentioned, it's a smorgasbord of ideas and thoughts. And you pick and choose for what is good for your context, good for your kids and where they are. And we'll take a look at some of those right now.
And I just want to back up to that one slide that Chad was just talking about. The importance of making sure they know this before you even launch into some of those sample activities. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. It's kind of like the discussion piece. You know, when we say lean over to your partner who's sitting next to you and discuss or talk about the following. But if I've never actually sat down with you and talked about what does a discussion entail, what would an end product for a discussion be, then it doesn't really mean much to me. It's just, I'm doing it, but I'm not really understanding or making connections. So having good understandings of these pieces will be important for students. And Ted's done a great job of showing you some of those steps within slide decks with examples of how I might unpack those. So you're not going to use everything. You're definitely not going to use everything that's in the slide deck, but you would pick and choose what fits with your unit, the way you envision it to fit in your room with what you have available or your style of teaching. What are the pieces that the kids need to have filled in before you kind of launch into any of those? So before we go into surface level activities for grade 1, it'll be important for you to know what are the concepts that in a perfect world, had they already done the brand new kindergarten Earth systems, they would have come to you in your class knowing this already. So we're going to always take the time to highlight if there are some key concepts that you should be aware of. You might want to go back into the kindergarten folder and grab some of their resources, or just use some of the slide decks, pieces that were given in this slide deck, because you're going to get this slide deck at the end as well. So if there's things here that you feel the students aren't quite there yet, then you want to just pause for a moment and go back and grab some of those key concepts. One of them is environments. So we have done now work in kindergarten about what is an environment. So they would have, in a perfect world, coming to you, having done this, they would already know what that is at your door, but they may not know that this year. So you might have to do a little bit of work on bridging on what is an environment. Let's just do some questions about it. Let's find out what they know. When they look at an environment, what is the notice and wonder? So we actually unpack, what does it mean to wonder something? What does it mean to notice? What am I doing when I'm noticing things? I'm looking for, what am I looking for? So we have students, perhaps a suggestion in kindergarten was, here's a picture. We have them work in partners. And at the end, between the two of them, they're going to come up with and finish the sentence. We wonder what? We looked at this picture and we wonder the following, or we noticed the following. And so that we can, as a class, start to build some of their understandings together. What are they seeing? What are they not seeing? Are there anything that's obviously continuously being missed? We also gave them scenarios that have both natural and man-made things in them. Although in the initial part, we're not asking them to do that. We're just saying, what's your wonder? When you look at this picture, what are you thinking? What are you noticing? What are you wondering? But we come back and use the same picture again to say, what are the natural things that you're seeing? What are the natural pieces of this diagram or this picture? What are the man-made pictures or pieces of this picture? So we bring back the concepts that they're now unpacking in kindergarten into a familiar picture that they've already seen in a different context. Same with this one, right? So we're asking them to, again, look at this. What environment? What's your wonder? Funny how one of the little guys, when we first showed them these pictures, one of their wonders was, where are the children? Is nobody playing on this playground? That's a good wonder. I mean, it's a good observation. So those are the things that we want them to see. And again, I could come back to this and say, now, of this picture, which ones of these, what items in here, what are you seeing that's man-made? What are you seeing that's natural? So are they picking up that there are trees and that there are grass and that those are natural, not man-made? So again, it's just, we can combine common photos that you teach surface level material to come back and reteach from a different lens using a different concept that I want to have. So at the end of those pictures, we also ask them, what is an environment? Now that we saw these pictures, we had some wonders and we had some notices that we saw. After looking at all of those, how would we describe what is an environment? So students should know that already coming to grade 1, but this year they won't maybe have the articulate language for that. So you might need to revisit that before you go further. Using another kindergarten comparative picture, what are some of the objects that are the same and different in each of these environments? So they have studied objects and properties of objects. And those are really, really important concepts that carry through in a lot of organizing ideas. So again, that's something that we might want to revisit at some point, not as significant in Earth systems, but definitely it should be in their background. And then we have a bit of a description at the bottom already of what we've generated with them about what an environment might be. A quick graphic that you might use as a visual, especially if we're having to do a little bit of bridging. What are some components of an environment? I see things that are living, I see plants, I see places, I see people doing things. And of all of those things, which ones would be considered natural? Which ones would be considered man-made? So that they're starting to always look at an environment in the light of having different possibilities and different lenses that I see things through. Then we also tied in exploring an environment. So we could even go back again to the same pictures, but we could generate new ones using my senses. So do the students that arrived at your doorstep this year, are they familiar with their 5 senses? And they should have learned them in matter, or they will learn them in matter if you haven't done matter yet, but they need them here as well. So it's one of those things that keeps coming up again that we need to spend some time on. And we may ask them to do a bit of a sort. So if you're feeling that, I don't know if they all know their senses strongly, in here, there's a hyperlink to a card sort. You can just download the cards, cut them up, give them the headers, and just say, can you, first of all, we just told them to organize. We didn't even use the word sort. We just said, here's all your cards in kindergarten. Can you organize them to put them in piles of things that you think belong together? We didn't say put things that belong to senses, we didn't anything like, we just said what belongs together. The power in that is for me as a teacher, as assessment. Because when I now go around and I walk to each of the groups and I say, can you talk to me about this pile? I don't care what's in their pile. I want to know what their explanation is about why did they put things in that pile? What are the commonalities that they saw that created that pile? I can get specific after, but I just want to know, what is their language that they already have sitting around that? What do they already know in doing this sort of card sort that we're asking them to do? And then I could give them these headers that have the senses on them and say, now, could you take your cards and put them again? I want you to resort them, but this time I want you to put the card to the sense that you think it belongs to. And we did do that with kindergartens. We did that with grade 1s. Students also said very quickly, I have a card, but I think it belongs with like sight and smell. I don't think it belongs just in one, it belongs in both, but I only have one card. So what do I do? We said, what do you think you could do? They said, well, we could put it in the middle. That's good thinking on parts of kids. If I put it in the middle, that's like creating a Venn diagram. I had things that belonged to sight, I had things that belonged to smell, and then I had this section in the middle that belonged to both of them. So that's creating a Venn diagram in just a different format. They're more than able to handle that. We just need to give them sort of the prompts to go ahead and think outside the box, that it doesn't have to be right underneath the picture. So again, how can we explore them? We can use our senses. What kinds of words can we use to describe the things that we're feeling in those objects? How do I describe my environment, the objects in the environment, right? So what are the things that I can use, terminology that would use? So here what we have is just a sample of things that we could use in these 3 pictures. In each picture, which of your senses would you use? Definitely is going to probably be more than one, but we're not going to tell them that. So which of your senses would you use, and what would you use them for? What do you think that sense is going to give you? What information does it give you? Are there any objects in each of the pictures that you would use more than one sense to identify? One of the challenges you might say to a child in grade 1 is, could you go home tonight and find me one item from home and bring it tomorrow that you could only use one sense to describe? It's going to be a tough call for them. Are there any items that you could use all 5 senses for? That's a great question. That's a great assessment question right there. Do I understand how they all connect together? What am I looking for when I'm looking for an object that uses all 5? So here we provide you with the pictures. Again, you're welcome to use or not use. So which of my senses would I use? This is at a farmer's market. What am I going to notice? I'm going to be outside. I'm going to have senses that pick up outside. I hear things outside. I can read. I can see signs. I'm going to have fruit and vegetables. What do I need to feel them for? What am I feeling them for? What am I going to feel? I feel some are softer, some are hard, some are bumpy, some are smooth, right? So all of those different components that they could use. What about if they go tobogganing? What senses are they using if they're going tobogganing? And what does that sense tell them? Does it give them any safety? Does it give them any information about their surroundings? Or what about just a soccer game? Okay, again, what senses are we using for soccer? And I could flip any one of these 3 pictures and say, in this picture of soccer, are there any natural products? Are there any man-made products? So I could just flip the same thing and ask them, do they recognize clothing as being man-made, that they have shoes on the ball? They've got grass that they're playing on. There's trees in the background. Well, those are the naturals. Like, what are they seeing? So just always bringing them back to broaden their lens when they look at things, to see them in different lights in a variety of different ways, not always because we ask them to. Are they starting to look at things and see them on their own? So types of instructional approaches, and remember that we're not in any way suggesting that we don't do a good job of teaching, but we are saying maybe if you're looking for some ideas and you have in this organizing idea lots of terminology, lots of surface level starting pieces that you're going to have to do. Are you going to do the same approach for every surface level terminology? Or would you like to maybe try a different one? So it's the same end product for sure, but are there other ways that we could approach that same thing just to change up the routine in the classroom, or maybe how the kids are approaching things, or how they're going to be partnered up, those types of things. So here is just a list of possibilities of things that we could do when I'm just doing surface level, that foundational learning piece. And because I have so many new terms, I'm not suggesting in any way that you would do all of the terms first and then try and make connections. I would know that grade 1s have a limited attention span that they're going to have. There's only so much I can take in at one shot. So maybe I'm doing 3 or 4 of those terms. I'm introducing them, but before they leave that subject and we change to something else, I should already be asking them a question that is starting to connect those pieces together. It might be their very first time that they're thinking about how they fit together, but it's starting to move them to that deep, right? I want to get them to start thinking about, why did you teach me all these terms? How are they all fitting together? What am I going to do? So asking those kinds of questions, and maybe seeing them in different lights. Maybe tomorrow they come in and they see the same things, but they get it in a card sort, or they're going to do a 4-corner kind of question, or whatever works for your style and your unit that you have it designed. These are simply ideas that we can put forward to suggest maybe you want to use. And in here, when I'm talking about surface level activities, Ted did a great job of already sort of unpacking those for you. What am I starting with? Well, seasons is one. I need to be able to make sure that they know what seasons are. It's not the first time that they've heard seasons, but again, it's a revisit. And now we're looking at seasons not only in, do I know the seasons? Can I recognize the change that occurs in each of the seasons? What's my tip? What's my cue to tell me that this is a different season? Excuse me. And then also, excuse me, what are some of the things that I'm going to incorporate, like the changes in the environment? It gets a little bit cooler. The nights are getting a little bit shorter. How is that affecting? How does that change what happens in my surrounding? How are the animals responding to that? So they've already talked about that in another organizing idea, but now's a good time to respond to that again. What are animals going to do when they notice that the lights are getting longer and it's cooler in nighttime? So that kicks in some of those migration patterns for animals. They start realizing, okay, we start flocking together at this time of the year, starting to move south. So those are the pieces that we start to unpack from a surface level and start to work them through as we migrate them into a deeper combination. Hibernation, migration, they have seen those terminologies before, but on the same token, do they know animals that migrate? Do they know animals that hibernate? Again, depending on where you are located, where your students are coming from, if they're farming students versus urban students, if they are living in a mountain area versus a prairie area, different things that they're going to see and tune into right away. So tailoring it to that area that you live in to make it more obvious for them will be important. Ted, do you want to talk about any of the ones that you've got highlighted in here? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll take a quick look at one, but I just want to talk about them in general. You'll see some things there. They're quite, these are really surface level activities. In other words, they're going to introduce students to these ideas or these concepts, giving them a name, giving them a definition, and a couple practices in identifying them, providing examples of it. So this students may already know some of these things from previous grades, or just as something they know as general knowledge, but we're not too sure. So there's some activities to introduce them just in case. At the end of each of these activities, most of them are something called concept attainment, where you provide examples and non-examples, and then you work together to provide a definition. The end of those activities have some things that can be used formative assessments if you want. So you could start at the end of the activity and say, hey, look, do you know, can you identify what are some good criteria to make a decision about this? Criteria, interestingly enough, is a concept that's introduced at grade 1. When you take a look at the progressions, for the competencies in grade 1 to 3, under decision making, criteria is used in there, that students will use criteria while making decisions. And we know that there's some decision making in this one when it comes to students the seasonal changes affects our decisions about our behaviors or what we do. So what are some criteria that we would follow when we make decisions? Like for criteria could be how hot it is, how cold it is, raining, not raining, or so on. So that's a really brief, I think, appropriate grade level introduction to criteria. A lot of these use pictures instead of words to develop them as well. So there's that to it. And the investigation one I want to point out, because that's one that shows up in the learner outcome, but it comes from scientific methods. So if you quickly click on that, Chris, I just want to show how that's organized. We're not going to go through every link in here, but this activity basically does a few things. It introduces students to, and you, to the 4 steps in grade 1. There's only 4 steps in an investigation or an experiment or whatever you want to call it, but we would call it an investigation in the science course. And then we move from, and how do we unpack that? How do we get students to understand those 4 sub-skills, which is asking questions, making predictions, gathering data, and forming conclusions? And how do we then put it all together? So if you scroll down, Chris, and break it down into various steps, step 1 would be just breaking those sub-skills down. What does it mean to gather data? For the most part, at grade 1 kindergarten, it's going to be based on observations with your senses, as Chris talked about. How do we get kids to ask questions or begin looking at doing that? There's an activity introduction there. An introduction to prediction. How do we make a prediction? What are some sample sheets to go along with that in conclusion? So we introduce those at each separately at that level, and then we provide opportunities along the way to practice those. And finally, at the end, when they're good at those individual skills, we put it all together. And then there's a template for making an introduction or an investigation, and those shouldn't be in there. I'll get rid of those, Chris. That's from another example. And then some sample investigations. Students need to practice an investigation in all the 4 steps outside of the course content, because you want them to be focused on the investigation and the steps. So you can do some fun ones to have them practice. For example, what's the most favorite color of students in the class, or which objects will float, and you have a collection of objects. So you can do some investigations that aren't related to what they do, so the kids focus on those 4 skills together. And you can click out of that one then, Chris.
And you'll notice that, as Ted said, these are already done for you, right? This is not like you're developing them. He's laid this out for you with all the diagrams that you could need. So it really is a time saver for you, but also a structure that you can use then to unpack those different concepts with the students. Okay.
And the next page has some more, actually.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about interaction, there's an example there. Again, it's graphic. It uses pictures to introduce students grade 1 to what is a relationship, and even the concept map and the cause and effect. Those concept introductions, again, use pictures for the most part, so the kids don't have to read. So take a look at them, and the kids, if they know those already, then again, you could use some of the questions at the end of those slide decks as a pre-assessment to know whether or not kids really understand those concepts or not. So
if we start off with some of that surface level pieces, again, we're asking them to define for us, or to even describe for us, what is a season. And this is one of those long change effects that happen. So this might be something that they're going to be recording over the year. And that's one of the suggestions that we have. There's a foldable built in here. We'll look at that in a minute. But I might say to a student, because seasons happen and I'm in school for all of them at some point, what am I seeing in each one? It doesn't have to be all done in 2 weeks. There's no rush to get through that piece. So what does it look like? And I could keep track of a particular piece over the year. And so one of the suggestions that I have in there is maybe the students even take a picture of a particular place in the school ground outside that is the same place they're going to take 4 different pictures of. And they start to watch how does it change as they take their seasons and they go through it. So they're doing it all year, filling it into their foldable as they go through. But in case, you also have some resources. There's some videos here. You may decide that you wish to start with videos. So using a case study approach where instead of me talking to you about seasons right off the bat, I'm going to start with a story. That's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to say, we're going to read a story. And we start the story, but the story is targeted towards the seasons. And why my questioning as I finish the story will tease out to see whether or not they picked up on what seasons are and can they name them for me. Or I show them a video and do the same thing. So I don't necessarily have to have a delivery first and then a follow-up. I could do it the other way around and use that case study approach where I pull things out. Or some teachers will read the story, then show the video, and then we start talking with the kids. Geez, what did you hear in both of these that were the same? What have we learned so far? And teasing it out from that way. Just another approach, something a little bit different for them.
Today, we will learn about...
You might want to give them a slide deck, okay? And ask them, can they identify? This is very surface level. Can you tell me which season is in each picture? So this is just a straight surface level, name it. Do they know summer from spring, from winter, from fall? And how do I know? What's your cue? What's your tip that's telling you that that's a picture of winter or that this one's a picture of fall and so on? So something as simple as that, just to get me going, is a quick, easy, formative for me too. Which one do you see? There's no gray areas there. It's right or wrong. And that's typically when we're doing surface. It's fairly simple. It's fairly straightforward. It's kind of like the spelling of science. It's right or wrong. There's no grays in a wrong spelling. The goal isn't about spelling the word right. I mean, that's part of it, but that's a small little piece. The goal is for me to be able to use the word and write a sentence. That's my goal. But I have to learn that small pieces before I can get into the big ones. Again, what do they see here? Can they identify? Or maybe you come back a few days later. Or maybe you turn them into card sorts where you give them headers by the names of the seasons and say, can you put them underneath the right season? Can they find a picture or a location in the school ground where they're going to take 4 separate pictures that would model what the seasons would look like? Do they have a picture at home? Some parents take a picture of the children in every season at the same location and chair or bench or whatever. Maybe they have something like that already that they can bring. So as we're working through some of these pieces, we also want to talk to them about change that happens a little bit faster than the whole year. Like, for example, at this time of the year, our days are shorter. There's more darkness. It's cooler. It's starting to get colder. The days don't hit, well, normally, okay, we'll say this has been an exceptional week, but normally we don't have 25-degree temperatures in mid-October. Like, that doesn't usually happen. But at this time of the year, there are changes that are happening. And what's happening with the animal world? What's happening? How are they using their senses in order to navigate the environment that's around them? Again, those are some bits of conversations that we've already talked about with students when we talked about how they use their senses to live in environments. How are their senses different than ours? They may have keener sense of smell, keener sense of hearing, okay? But again, now we're asking them, what are those changes that are occurring? In this case, a little bit more short term for fall. I'm going to maybe start migration. Maybe I'm an animal that's going to be hibernating. I need to go and collect food. I need to eat as much as I can like a bear. Maybe I'm just stacking a whole bunch of food away because I am up all year long. I don't sleep. So what is my activity that I'm going to do? So unpacking that whole notion of, do we have any animals in our area that you live in that would fall under migration? What about change adaptations? Are there any changes in the environment that would affect you? How does it change for us? Do we put a coat on at this time of the year? Usually in the morning we do, because it's quite chilly. It's not what we're not used to seeing anymore. And as it gets colder, we start to dress accordingly. So those are changes that we make. Those are adaptations that we're making. What about animals? They grow thicker fur. Some of them shed their fur come spring because they don't need the extra layer of warmth and heat. So all of those pieces, do they have a pet at home? How does the pet respond to differences at different times of the years? A lot of our in-house pets shed like crazy come fall, shed like crazy come spring. They don't necessarily get thicker fur, but they do go through cycles. And so those are other pieces that we can talk about. Hibernation. Do they know any animals that hibernate? Do they know what hibernation is? Right? That goes back to what Ted said. Can't talk about hibernation until I even know what it is. So I need to make sure I have that understanding of what does hibernation mean first before I start to make connections between those two pieces. Every one of these here has a hyperlink in it, so that gives you more information if this is something that you wish to use within your unit. What about changes that take place suddenly? And again, this might be something that you're careful about how you approach, depending on where you are in the province, given the fire situation that this happened this year. Some of our students might still have some pretty bad memories of fire, especially if their houses were lost or if their homes were lost. But this is an example of a sudden change. Our forest fires, we didn't have control over them. We can't stop them. We can't just say, here's the fence, you can't cross the fence. So it's a sudden change. Could have been a result of lightning, could have been a result of whatever. But here comes this sudden change that changes an environment fairly significantly. And again, when I look at just doing a sort of a campfire stack of wood, and then I light it, first of all, we have changes in properties that occurred there. Does that wood look the same when it's done? No, it doesn't. How does it look? Well, it's changed its form. For one, the properties are quite different. How would I explain that sudden change? Well, in this case, it was a deliberate fire. But what about if we were talking about a sudden forest fire? What if we talked about a flood, right? If we had a picture in which we were looking at a flood, which comes up here, what's the change that happened there? What is the change in the environment? Are those always going to come back to what they were before? This wood is not going to come back to the way it was before. What if there was a flood? What if that flood changed the landscape significantly? That landscape going to come back eventually over time? Maybe not. Likely not, right? I think of the flood that Calgary had a few years back. It rerouted their river completely. There are places that river never actually existed until after the flood came through, and then the actual riverbed is now dry. The new form of where the riverbed is going is completely new. It wiped out roads. Those roads didn't come back again. That river's not moving, it's staying. So some of those sudden changes become very permanent changes. And how does that affect us as humans? How does it affect the animals? How does it affect the environment? So again, some opportunities for us to consider where I live, what are some realities that students might be able to connect with, but it's still okay for us to show them pictures of things that they wouldn't necessarily experience in that location, because that's just a new scenario that once I've learned it, I should be able to give you enough information back again as I'm explaining to you what are the impacts of that change in that environment. So as we look here for the understandings, we see how these understandings have been worded. We see changes in environments include seasonal changes. So we're talking about seasons. We're talking about seasons or sudden changes, the fire that we talked about, the flood that we talked about. Chances of us experience a volcano in Alberta, not high. An earthquake, possibility, but again, not a huge opportunity. A severe storm, big hailstorms, of course, those are things that we could definitely connect with students. And again, depending on where you live, they might be more prevalent than other places. And seasonal changes influence decisions on daily activities, right? What can I do? What do I wear? What can I do? What am I able to go outside? Am I riding my bike all year round when I have 2 feet of snow outside? Probably not. Not saying that some kids don't, but probably not. Caring for nature, a sense of responsibility. What examples would students be able to give you that they would be able to demonstrate their understanding about we have care of the environment? If you live in an area that has maybe a boardwalk, I'm thinking of when we lived in Hinton, we had huge lakes, lots of mountain paths and whatever, but a lot of them were boardwalks in which we deliberately had built places people could walk with intentional do not step off the boardwalk because we're trying to preserve the natural state of everything around the boardwalk. So it was an opportunity for us to walk and see, but intentionally done so that we're not damaging the environment around there. So what examples do they see of that? Where do we see that in national parks? How do we see that happening? So for those of you who do camping, you've probably encountered lots of opportunities to use as examples for that. So again, when we talk about seasons, this would be an opportunity now that I know a little bit about a season. Maybe I go a little bit deeper. These are videos that give you time-lapse photography of changes either over a day, over an entire year, in short periods of time. So students can actually see it. We know that seasons take a long time to change. And yes, I can see spring. Yes, I can see summer. Yes, I can see fall, but it's gradual. So if I wanted to see it over time, you might want to show them these time-lapse photographies and then have them again make connections between what are they seeing outside right now. Perhaps even when they go through it, could they call out, what season have we just switched into? And it doesn't go that fast that they can't do that. So again, these are really interesting. The kids really like it. They think it's quite cool to kind of see the whole season go by. Sorry, they come on as soon as we engage this. Here's another activity that you could consider as an assessment. So in my environment, what do I see? A representation over time. So this is one where I say, go out and watch, take a picture of some place that they can go every season and see how it's changed. Whether it's a plant, whether it's a place that gets covered in snow, doesn't get covered, has leaves on it, whatever you decide or they decide they're going to do. And then identify each season and give an explanation as to why it represents that season. How do you know if that's a park bench? How did you know it was fall? What were the indications that were fall? What were the indications it was spring? Maybe there's smatterings of snow, but there's a little bit of green tough grass coming up already. So what are they able to articulate for you to indicate the change in this season? Again, just suggestions that you might get some ideas. Sudden changes. Maybe I want to show them the pictures and ask them again, how are these environments then affected by a sudden change? What happened? What do you think What would you predict would be the long-term effect? Do you think that once this fire has gone through, that things will come back again? Will things regrow? Having that conversation. Is it a permanently damaged, it'll never come back again? There may be those situations that occur, but in most cases, the forest will come back. It will take time. What about where there's a flood? Okay, water covers the highway. Is that likely to stay that way? It could. That's a possibility. What do you think happens in this environment now? Well, we probably can't drive down that road, right? So we're just looking for, what do they know? What do they see? What are their notices that they're putting together already? And then what's the long term? Well, the water would have to recede. It's very possible that that water will go down into the ground. We've seen pictures like this in Alberta in spring, where we've had tons and tons of snow in summer or in winter. And we've seen that in spring, but it doesn't stay that way forever. So again, it will change, but that's a sudden change. Warm weather, all of a sudden the water shows up in places we didn't have before. Or more typical in Alberta, what about a severe snowstorm? What about an ice storm? What about a hailstorm? We have all the different kinds of examples that we can give students. So these could be deep because they could be new scenarios that the students haven't talked about. Maybe they're not new, and now you're going to find another one that you're going to give them an example of, whether it be a hailstorm, a lightning storm, whatever, like a severe windstorm has come through, and we show pictures of what's happening when that wind is coming through. So as Ted said, as you're moving them through that deep to transfer, they've gotten lots and lots of examples in deep. And what you're doing is checking for assessment. Do they understand the concepts? Are they able to articulate it? Are they able to do it less structured by you and more on their own? And really the difference between that deep and that transfer will just be another new scenario. Could be the same kind of questions, but a scenario you didn't show me as a practice, a scenario that we didn't already talk about, that could be my transfer one. And I'd also like to maybe just add in that transfers, summatives, whatever you want to call them at this point, don't always have to cover every cusp that you're teaching. In some cases, some of those cusps are more information and tools and foundations for the next cusp that really is the one I want to assess and that I need to assess. And or sometimes if you've got 6 cusps, which you have, maybe 3 of them, and not necessarily in order, 3 of them fit together well, and you want to assess those from a summative perspective. And the other ones, you're going to maybe grab smatterings of that, but you're going to do the other ones. I can do 2 summatives and combine them together. There's no reason it has to be one big test for everything. So just keep that in mind too, is that we're not suggesting in any way that it always has to be a huge, big final at the end of an organizing idea. And you will often see some of the summatives that we're going to show you, especially when we get the curriculum support documents out to you. But some of them are more tailored to maybe 2 of them covering the entire organizing idea. There is a book that is out. Some of you may already have these in your classrooms. They are free to download. They're called the Learning Circle, and they're done by grade or age. 4 to 7 is the one that you might want to look at it. It works well for grade 2, 3. It has a section in there on seasons, and it's really well done, but from the Indigenous lens as well. So offering our students who are Indigenous in our classrooms a place to see themselves in the classrooms as well from their perspective. So you can download this. The link is right here to just download the book. There's also a book that goes from 8 to 11, and then there's another one that goes older. So you can download them all. They're free. They come from the site right here, which is of Office of the Treaty Commissioner. You can also get them from Canada. The Canadian government has a link for them as well. That's where this one is. This one here, if you have never seen the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, I'm just going to take you there right now, but I'm not going to go through it all. The Office of the Treaty Commissioner is located in Manitoba, and much of the materials that we do use in schools across Canada when it comes to Indigenous perspectives come from Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. I'm not saying not from Alberta, because they do, but a lot of connections are there, and a lot of them are very common. This particular site, Office of the Treaty Commissioner, has an education component to it with resources, and it's free for teachers. So if you have not been here, when you get the slide deck, go there and sign up and you have free books that are in the background, free resources that you can access and download, free videos. The videos are excellent that you can download. So if you haven't got a lot of resources in that area, then you might want to visit that site. So again, here is one that's starting to link towards the First Nations. When we look at the season story, we now know what the seasons are, but how does that change a little bit if I'm looking at it from the lens of an Indigenous member of society? Then I'm looking at their season story, and it also ties in the medicine wheel. So there's another contrasting piece that we can talk about. And again, it still fits well with your outcomes. It fits exceptionally well with the 1.5 that you're looking at. But the season story, it's linked in here and it's free, so you're free to download it as well. And also, in addition to that, for those of you who know me for a couple of years already, you know that I use a lot of foldables. A foldable is simply a graphic organizer that, when it's done in its entirety, in this case, this is just for seasons, especially for the children who might be taking that picture over time. A graphic organizer actually, when it's put together, encompasses your entire unit. So if I was going to do a proper one, it would be called Earth Systems. And everything that you would teach in Earth Systems would be housed within one foldable. This one is a little bit simpler one. It's simply on the seasons. You will have access to the photocopy, in other words, the templates for this. And then I've also got the steps in here on how to fold it so that you have access to it. Foldables, when you use 11 by 17 paper, will always fit into an 8.5 by 11 pouch, plastic page protector. And that's usually where I put the foldables in, whether I'm doing them with smaller children in grade 1 or whether I'm doing them with grade 12s. They just get a page protector and they throw it in there. And that allows them to go through and do that. So here's the link for you to access it, and the instructions on how to put it together and use it within the classroom are already in here. Okay, I think we are looking at some videos as well. For some of you who are looking for connections to the land, not necessarily just about seasons, but if we're looking for how do I engage in the land, how do I look at different seasons, how do I look at the importance of water and land, these videos that you have here will give you extra information. Again, some of it might be for yourself. Some of it you might want to share with the students. Not all of these would be at the level of a grade 1 student. All right, here we go. Okay, Ted, do you want to talk to this one?
Yeah, I will, but just looking at the time, well, I won't really go through too much. They're really self-explanatory. I think I'll just explain really briefly. These are just examples that you can use for either deep learning or really transfer activities or assessments as well. To do this series of next slides, the students really need to know what relationships are, what cause and effective, and a little bit of basic concept map of two things joined together. So maybe I could just suggest that there were some examples there. If you're going to use them, I really urge you to look at those activities because they're really good introductions for how things would flow along the way. And we're going to send you pretty soon here the link of this slide presentation in PDF form, so you can actually open it up and take a look at it yourselves as soon as you can. So it's really just asking for what's the connection between seasonal change, appearance of environment. And if they understand what seasonal change is, appearance of environment is, then they should be able to decide which causes which, as we could see on the next page, which is a basic simple concept map that we're introducing kids. Just two things in it. The appearance of the environment causes seasonal changes. And actually, it's interesting, it didn't happen, but there's actually a graphic on this one. Then the copy you'll get in your slide deck has graphics to associate the words for kids who can't read, and they can work with the graphics. So what causes which? Does the appearance of the environment cause the seasonal change, or does the seasonal change cause the appearance of environment? And of course, for students to understand that, they need to know what causes, and you can see what effective and what seasonal change is, which Chris, we developed that in the surface level. The appearance of the environment is something we developed at the surface level. And if we did cause and effect and relationships, right, that would all have been done at the surface level. So this assessment would be able to, I think, is quite doable with the kids. So when just we're long here, Chris, well, I've got that PDF deck ready to go. So
Okay, you want to throw it into the chat box?
yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, just some more examples of things you could do with once kids have really good, deep, good, solid foundations with the concepts, they should be able to do these quite easily.
So these will give you some samples that you can use, and any one of these in the end could have been a deep, but they could also be the transfer rate. It depends on how you framed your unit. How many exposures have I seen to been able to show you? And then once I've given you all the information that you need, then I'm ready for a formative, then it's a matter of simply grabbing one of these if you want, or changing them, or getting ideas from this one and changing it into whatever works for you. All right, there is a link in here for you for Earth Sciences from Ange again. Ange has gone through and done a direct link for computing science for grade 1 Earth systems. So if you've not seen her stuff before, you might want to have a look at some of her information, but then there's also the computer link. Is this the one for grade 1, Ted, or is this kindergarten?
Or it's kindergarten. I'll change it and resend it out here, everybody. So you have the kindergarten link over there.
Okay.
I'll try to get it done in time here. Sorry.
Okay. All right, no worries. And then below that, you have a number of resources, and I'm not going to read through them, but there are book resources. There are links in here where you can grab some information that relates directly to Earth systems, all of which you are able to access. And then there are some books that come from the Grandmother, Grandfather series. Some of you have that already. That would be helpful in the ones that we're working on right now. So some of the things that link to Earth systems, to seasons, to sharing, to looking after the land, all of those fit in there. So there's a number of books suggested. You may have them in your library, you may not. We will be coming out with a curriculum support document. So if you have not yet seen the Living Systems curriculum support document, you need to go to the arpdc.ab.ca site, our ARPDC site. And if you put in science, that's your subject, and your grade, there will be a Living Systems curriculum support document there. And you will find that's kind of a one-stop shop for you to go get resources, assessment, over and above what we've shown you on the videos. So we're trying to find another place for you to go and get resources from in the absence of maybe having a text or whatever it was you were looking for. So a place that you can get extra sites, extra supports, there's extra units in there. So just to help fill your unit the way you want to frame it and hopefully not have to go search for things. Okay, so your next one is in November, and that would be the week of the 20th to the 29th. And then that would be our last one because we don't do space in anything until grade 4. So that would be your last. So you will have the whole year. All of the curriculum support documents will be out by then too. So you will have that whole sort of package for you to unpack as you go through. Are there any questions at all? Sorry that we've run over. I know that there's so much to cover in this one. It was crazy.
So just so I understand, the support documents will be on that site?
They will be on the website. Yep, I can take you to one right now. If you haven't seen it or you don't know what you're looking for, let me just bring up the one for Living Systems for you. So I'm going to the arpdc.ab.ca site. This is where all of our new curriculum is.
Okay.
I select science. And when I go down to science, I'm actually going to put in my grade. Not that I have to, but I will. I'll put in grade 1. And when I come down, you'll see that Jordan already has put boxes in here to save some people looking for things. There is a box already called curriculum support documents because we know there's going to be one for every organizing idea in every grade. So when I just click that on, up comes Living Systems. Here's your grade 1 Living Systems. And when you bring this Living Systems up, what you will get, and this is what your Earth systems matter, all of those will look the same. You will have an introduction to what Living Systems is. These are hyperlinked if you want to jump around and not do them necessarily in any particular order. The green bar is your kind of your stop shop at the beginning. If you forget what this is all about, the very first one is hyperlinked and will tell you, how do I read this document? Like, what am I looking for? The next ones are hyperlinked to all of your progressions. This one is hyperlinked to a video just like this, except it was living systems.
Okay.
Following that, you have your planners. Ted had created those assessment planners and planners that we had for science. So he has put both of them in here for Earth systems, and you have an explanation on how to use them. So if you're not sure, you can just watch that quick video. There's your concept map for living systems. And here are your progressions that we showed you for the concepts, for the skills. And this is the newest version of the numbered outcomes. So if you haven't downloaded the numbered outcomes document or using it, just make sure that you have the one that says August the 8th in the bottom left-hand corner. If you don't, then you don't have the newest version. There were a few changes and tweaks that were made over the summer. So that will be, and so this will be continuously updated. So always just double check to see, is there something new? This is not a static document. We're going to come back and add to this. Below that, you have some sample summative assessments if you wish to use them. They're all editable by you. Everything will come down in Word form. So you can use all of, none of, part of, add in, whatever you want to do. Below that, prerequisite skills and misconceptions for the first row of cusps, one row at a time. The vocabulary in the first row, the I can, I know statements, and I understand statements are all there. Below that is that understanding that you just got again, the review of surface, deep, and transfer. So here are the surface components I need to start teaching before I launch into any connections for the kids. Here are some sample surface activities that you could use. Some of them are ones you've seen, some of them are brand new. They're not all that you've already seen. And then there are some deeper ones that are still falling under surface, but they're already starting to get connections going in their heads. These are your scientific method computing science, and here are some formative assessments if you wish to choose to use them. Below that, there are also other resources that you'll have access to, but these are specific to the cusp you are in. They're not like general. These are specific to what you're learning and teaching them right now. And then below that, we have, let's move into the deep. So what are the pieces now that I did the surface stuff? What are the parts of the cusp that are deep? What are some sample deep activities and other resources that lend to that side of it? There are some possible assessments that you have that you can use if you so choose. And then below that are sets of resources that were developed by other school divisions. So if there's something there, they'll be linked in here. There's a larger one that we'll put in. There's Indigenous related ones. We're going to actually build on that. We're just starting that tonight. There are general resources generally for this cusp that you are doing right now, but they could also apply to the rest of the organizing idea. And then as you move down, these will start to unfold as they apply to any organizing idea in your grade. So we tried to grab things. We've gotten permissions from publishers to use these resources, so you're free to go with them. You don't have to worry about that. Karen Bloomhagen has gone in, and if there was a gizmo that fits to Living Systems Grade 1, she has put it in here for you. So you don't have to go look for it. It's already done. There is a section called Primary Connections, and that comes from Australia. Primary Connections, they did a lot of work like we had in the math. If you haven't seen the curriculum support documents for math, they're living in this same site as well. We have permission from Australia to use the work that they did with their teachers. They have some really tight links to our resource or our organizing ideas as well. And if there was a link, we found it, we put it in here. You can go in, click it on. I'd encourage you to have a look at them. They're kind of a one-stop shop. There's the lesson, there's the assessment, there's the PowerPoint, there's the pictures, there's the activities. It's everything. Not everything fits to that one cusp, but there's a lot of info in there that you could use. And this repeats itself now for every row of cusps that you have in Living Systems. Every one of these is different because every cusp had a different focus. So every one of them will have new links in it. New assessments are added to it. And at the very, very bottom is a section called Literature Connections. So if you were looking for some books to put in your library. If you're looking for some books to use in the classroom, we have linked the books. We've also given you the link to which outcome it fits, like which cusp does that book fit to. There are not a lot of books that fit the whole organizing idea, but there's lots that fit multiple rows of cusps. So we've indicated which one it covers. If it's an epic book, that means that you could go in, search it in epic. That means you don't have to buy it. You just have to literally read it with the kids. It's there. So these books are all linked to Living Systems Grade 1. There will be more added to it in the next little while here. So again, this document is posted, but always go back and check. Check to see if there's anything new that's been added to it. Matter will be coming up, so will Earth Systems. Those will be coming up as well. All right, is there any, I hope that explains that to you. And those are, I hope they're going to be good documents for you. I think they will give you good starting points, at least to get going. That will be the main thing. Are there any
Thank you.
questions? You're welcome. I'm going to just stop our recording.